Hi, so this is the Pecha Kucha project for Brea, Kirami, and Symani, and we will be talking about the communication strategies of the Soviet Union from 1930 to 1950. So this sign represents the Ministry of External Relations, which was established in 1923, and the ministry dealt with the appointment of Soviet diplomats, compromised with certain countries in the interest of socialism, and economic and political interests of the USSR. It was also heavily based on Marxism-Leninism ideology. This represents the People's Commissariat for Communications of the USSR. It was the agency of communications from 1932 to 1946, and its job was to administer postal, telegraph, and telephone services. It was also responsible for developing all types of general communications like radio and TV broadcasting, and later it was superseded by the Ministry of Communications in 1946, and that's what it is today. This represents television in the Soviet Union, which was strictly controlled and censored. Taboos weren't shown, and some of these taboos included anything about sex, exempting platonic gestures, also nudity and violence, and other things. News programmers had to speak eloquently with excellent knowledge of Russian language. Now, with the actual TV programs, there were only 5 channels for each TV set, and regular programming was introduced in 1939. It was also difficult to send TV shows to all Russian people due to geography and time zones, which were about 18 of them, and so not all Russians could view these channels at the same time. Anything concerning these nations besides the USSR were forbidden on these TV programs. Satellite services, also known as orbita. So at the time, it was the largest domestic satellite system in the world. The Russian satellite services were effective at time-shifting programs since there were so many different time zones within USSR. The 2 types of time-shifting used included one based on radio programs in Russia. The second type was called double programming for the different time zones. Gavlet was official censorship program in the Soviet Union. It was created in 1932, and the main purpose of it was to stop the release of forbidden secrets in newspapers and other forms of printed materials. Forbidden secrets included anything about the military, economics, or anything else. So this represents Russian literature. Socialist realism was popular in Russian literature during the 30s, while Soviet science fiction was popular in the 1950s. Socialist realist authors glorified strong communist values, the working poor, and political consciousness within their stories, while science fiction authors spoke about philosophy and dystopian/utopian societies. Socialist realism was established in the late 1920s, and it was considered a way for the government to control the art that was produced in the USSR. The way this art movement was controlled was by creating art that focused on an optimistic communist future rather than the harsh reality that Soviet citizens faced. Pravda was first distributed in 1980. It was a newspaper that was distributed all over Russia, allowing Russian citizens easy access to journals and articles about science and entertainment. It was also very critical to the Central Committee of the USSR, and it mostly talks about domestic violence. The education system in the USSR was supervised by the People's Commissariat for Education. People's Commissariat had complete control over what subjects would be taught, all historical monuments in Russia, and publishing services. Subjects taught in schools, particularly social science, was dominated by Marxist-Lenin ideals. The first regular radio broadcast in the Soviet Union was in 1924. It was produced in Moscow at the Comintern radio station. And then the following year, the Radio Commission of the Central Committee began supervising all radio broadcasts. In 1948, the USSR started radio jamming so Russian citizens could not listen to political broadcasts on Western broadcasting stations such as the BBC and Voice of America. This operation costed the Soviet Union about $10 million each year. The Telegraph Agency of the Soviet Union was the central agency for collection and distribution of internal and international news for all Soviet newspapers, radio, and television stations. It had a monopoly of official state information and was created from the Russian Telegraph Agency, aka Rasta, which was the first state news agency in Soviet Russia. It was frequently used as a front organization by the Soviet intelligence agencies such as NKVD and GRU. Filmmaking in the Soviet Union was one of the greatest tools used to spread communist ideals. Although film was not an effective tool to use on the peasants, film was very useful in impacting the economy, politics, and technology. Journalism, just like television, radio programs, and newspapers, were strictly censored in the Soviet Union, so you couldn't say certain things about the Soviet Union involving politics or economics or anything like that. And the oppression of Americans in the Soviet Union. So Americans were not allowed to travel around the country or attend press conferences, and they could not talk to officials who censored their articles, and they were forbidden to include any analysis of Soviet politics, foreign policy, and economy in their reporting. So that's it for the communication strategies of the Soviet Union. Hope you enjoyed. Bye!